Welcome everyone to New Jersey TESOL, New Jersey BE's, what is it? The sixth
Yeah.
presentation of our Literacy PLC series. Today we have Kiina Dordoni, who is actually the chair of our Countering Anti-Black Racism Committee. And today she will be presenting evidence-based practices for literacy for speakers of Black English. And take it away, Kiina.
Thank you. Hi. This feels so like strange now because I feel like we always see each other in our committee meetings, and for some reason, doing a PD, it feels something about it feels a little bit different, even though this is what we do all the time. So, hello, welcome. I'm so glad everyone is here. And so this is evidence-based practices for literacy for speakers of Black English. And is that everyone can see this, my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Perfect. So actually, I'll introduce myself and then we're going to do a poll. So here's just some visuals as language teachers. We like the visuals in the background. So I'm an executive board member. I coordinate our social media. I'm the chair of our Countering Anti-Black Racism Committee, where this year we've spent a lot of time talking specifically about Black English. We are in the middle of a doing a book study right now. I'm a former high school assistant principal. I'm a former director of ELL bilingual programs. As a high school assistant principal, I oversaw the ELL bilingual program in a high school. I am a current doctoral student. I have a master's in bilingual bicultural education. So I love languages. I love everything about language. And just to share with you where is my slide? Oops. Okay. I wanted to just highlight for a second just some of like my research as a doctoral student and the things that I am studying right now that are important to me, just so you have a little bit of context of where I'm coming from as well. And if you have any questions about anything, please do just jump in or use the chat. So the research that I'm engaging in for my doctoral program is looks at both of these questions that I have up on the screen. Is number one, how do K-12 school and district leaders interpret and implement language policy to create an inclusive educational experience for Black multilingual students? So we're going to be talking about Black English today, and a lot of times, speakers of Black English are not included under the multilingual umbrella. When we talk about multilingualism, that's not the first language, and that's not part of the conversation that comes to mind. So that's something that I'm really interested in looking at. And then also, what factors do K to 12 school and district leaders describe as contributing to their ability to create inclusive educational spaces for Black multilingual learners? And so, again, for like an audience of people who have a lot of experience with working with multilingual students, there are a lot of things that we will readily consider and think about, and we'll look at those this evening, that we think about when we're talking about students who are multilingual learners. But if we don't even consider speakers of Black English under that multilingual umbrella, then there's so many things a lot of times that are already in our toolkit, but that we're missing in applying to a certain demographic of students just because we don't see them as multilingual learners, because Black English is typically not acknowledged as a language. So I'm just going to read some of these slides. This is these excerpts come right out of a book that we did for our summer book study by John McWhorter, and the name of the book is Talking Back, Talking Black: Truths About America's Lingua Franca. And I just love the way he opens the book with this. So I wanted to start with this as well. Is that in Haiti, the language of print, school, and the media is French. But when speaking outside of formal settings, people use another form of speech, Haitian Creole. In Sicily, the language of print, school, and the media is Standard Italian, but when speaking outside of formal settings, many people use another form of speech, Sicilian. And there, I just put a picture of my family there because that's my mother's side of the family, and I grew up hearing Sicilian in my home from my grandparents. In Switzerland, the language of print, school, and the media is High German, but for German speakers in that country outside of formal settings, they use something other than High German, Swiss German, which is quite different in sound, vocabulary, and structure from the German one learns in the book. In the United States, the language of print, school, and the media is what we call Standard English, but when speaking outside of formal settings, Black American people use, and then there's this dot, 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 because I'll just go back. We have these other terms. We have Haitian Creole, Sicilian, Swiss German, But now when we're talking about the language Black American people use, what are the terms that we come up with? And what is typically said is that this is what it is, that there's a lot of slang and bad grammar. Um, so what is it actually called? There are all of these terms, so I just want to clarify some terminology before we get started. So Black language is used. Some researchers and educators use Black language. Some people say Black English, African American vernacular English, and African American dialect, a dialect. So I'll tell you just a little bit about kind of like the debate with some of the words first, but as I move forward, I'm going to continue to refer to it as Black English. So there are folks who write and research extensively about Black English and want to call it Black language just to give it the validity that it deserves because it is a complete language system. It has been recognized, and we'll look at who it's been recognized by, a lot of the organizations that we're familiar with. And so, Black language is just saying that the same way we acknowledge languages like Sicilian, Italian, German, that Black language, because it has a robust language system within itself, grammatical structures, all of those things, it should be called a language in and of itself. There are other scholars who argue, well, if I'm a Black person and I also speak Spanish, then that's also Black language because I'm a Black person speaking that language. So wouldn't that be considered Black language? And if I also speak Yoruba, and I'm a Black person that speaks that, wouldn't that be considered a Black language because I'm a Black person speaking that language? So there are some folks that say we want to narrow it down because we're talking specifically about this language that was created here in the United States. That's this English that we use. So we're going to name it Black English. A familiar term was this AAVE, African American Vernacular English, but there's been some kind of pushback and like distancing from using both of these, AAVE, African American Vernacular English, and African American Dialect, because calling it a vernacular and a dialect is just saying, well, this thing right here is kind of a departure from the standard. So it normalizes what the standard is and is saying this other thing over here is a departure. So some linguists and some educators and some researchers in this field try to move away from calling it a vernacular and a dialect just because if I'm thinking about language in a hierarchy, using dialect or vernacular almost makes it seem like it's less than on the hierarchy. So, various people are going to use various terms, and everyone's going to have different reasons. And I would argue that whatever people's reasons are for using whatever term they choose is most likely going to be an accurate one based on what their perception is. I choose to use Black English, so that's what I'll be using through the rest of the presentation. So I want to just back up for a moment, and I'm going to ask you to engage in a poll um, about your own understanding if I'm able to do this in Zoom. Let's see. I might have to stop. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment, and hopefully this will work and I can get to this other piece. Oh, here we go. Okay. And I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. I apologize for that departure. Okay. So if you can, with your phone, just scan that the QR code that you see on the screen. And the question I'm asking is just what comes to mind when you hear Black English? So it'd be wonderful if everyone could just type in a word, just one word about what comes to mind. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Black English?
It's not letting me scan, Kina, because I don't know if something's in the middle here, not letting me scan. Hold on.
It's not letting you see it.
I don't know why. It's not letting me scan. Hold on just a minute.
I was able to scan it.
You
Okay.
are, I'm sure. It's my, I don't know what it is. Something up with my computer right now.
Okay. And if you want to say it, you're
Will
welcome.
you ask me the question again because I became so obsessed with trying to scan this that will you ask me that again?
Yes. So it's what comes to mind when you hear Black English. And if you want to tell me the word, I could put it in so that way it appears as well.
What comes to mind when I hear Black English? Yeah, comfort.
Okay, comfort. I'm going to put that. I'll put that in there. Oh, and thank you for putting the poll link in the chat as well. Comfort. Okay, so the words we have in here. So culture is a little bit bigger than the rest of them. So we got culture a couple of times. We have comfort, community, and home. And then I'm going to do one more question that I'm going to ask you to respond to. and this should have, if you were able to scan, this should pop up on your phone right away as well, is what has been your experience with Black English? And so this one can be a phrase, it could be a sentence if you want to, it could be a couple sentences. This is an open-ended one. So if you could just type in, what has been your experience with Black English? Okay, so let's see. Let me just read some of what we have on here so far is I've heard it being spoken, but I don't speak it. I've learned a great deal in the past few years. There is so much to learn and understand. It has common misconceptions. People consider it slang. I speak it and will continue to do so. I grew up listening to what it sounded like in music at first, and I wanted to learn it fluently because people said I spoke like a white girl. I heard it every day for 25 years. It was one of two languages of my surroundings. Okay, so I'm gonna stop share. Thank you so much for these responses. I'm gonna stop sharing that and just come back to the presentation for a moment. Hold on. And then just share again. Okay. Sorry about all the transitions, and thank you so much for your patience. So thank you for everything that you wrote in there. So I would love just to hear a little bit first before we go on is what was we saw culture, home, community. Is there would anyone just like to talk about why when you put that word in there, the first word that came to mind when you heard Black English, what is it that prompted you to put whatever word you put in there? Why did you put that in the poll?
I put community because I think that's a central part of language. I think, expressing yourself with people and to people, um, yeah, is a big part of speaking a language and understanding a language. So community was the word that I thought of.
Thank you.
I
Right.
put I put comfort because I feel like that's exactly when I think Black people are communicating with each other or in a situation where they feel at home and comfortable. That's what comes absolutely naturally to
Yeah.
them. So I think of it as comfort.
Yeah. And I really appreciate both of what it is that you shared because when we talk about just like practices for supporting students with their language, again, like making this connection to what are the same things we do for multilingual learners is we always tell teachers that we have to make sure that we're valuing students' language and that we have an asset-based approach to language. And for some reason, that winds up getting passed over when it comes to Black English sometimes. And so when we recognize it as this is something that links our students to community, to their culture, to home. Then it helps us just to rethink the way we critique that language. Because if the goal of language is to communicate with the people who are closest to us, the people who we care about, the people who we want to understand us, then there is nothing wrong or deficit based about the way it is that we're speaking. And so just understanding those approaches initially are super, super important. And so I put in the comments that for the second question, that it was something that I heard in music. And I was someone who thought for a very long time that Black English was slang and that it was something, it was broken and there was something wrong with it. But I also knew that I really, really wanted to learn it and become fluent in it because I wanted it to connect me to people who I knew I belonged to, but that I didn't really feel a part of. And so what I put in my comment too was that I was made fun of a lot. Like I spoke like a white girl, and that how can I really be Black with the way that I spoke? And so that wanting to learn Black English and to connect to it in order to feel home and to feel like I was part of a culture and a community that I belonged to is something that was really, really important. to me. So just keeping some of those things in mind, what I wanted us to take a look at first, again, before we get into just some nitty-gritty about language, is this poet, Paul Lawrence Dunbar. Are you all able to see his picture? Because I'm on my screen. Okay, so it's not blocked for you. Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to be quiet for a moment. What I would love for you to look at is I'm going to show you two poems by Paul Lawrence Dunbar. Take a moment and read this. I don't want to read it out loud. And the only reason I don't want to read it out loud or ask anyone else to read it out loud is because I don't want anyone, including myself, to feel like we need to put on a certain accent in trying to pronounce the words and read the words. So I'm just going to be quiet for a moment so we can read this poem to ourselves, and just see, are there any words, and you're welcome to use the chat for this, are there any words or grammatical structures or anything as you're even just trying to understand and comprehend the poem? Is there anything that's jumping out to you that says this is Black English? Or is there anything that's maybe difficult to understand or different just from the language that you typically use? So, what are the things that we notice about this? And this is the whole poem right here in two different sections. So, I'll be quiet so we can just read this to ourselves for a moment. Okay. So what are some of the things that we noticed, and what might have been some of the things that we read that might be, um, or actually, I don't want to ask a leading question. What are some of the things that you noticed? And is there anything in here that you felt like maybe you needed to focus on a little bit more just for comprehension or to understand what was happening?
Um, I noticed while reading it how much more phonetic Black English is than Standard English. Like much more the way it sounds, the way the person says it is the way they write it. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but it seemed to be in this, right? For example, when he says, course I do. And of course I do, right? That is the way he speaks and that is the way he writes. Whereas in English, standard English, what trips up so many times an English language learner is the way we write is so very different from the way we speak. I mean, the pronunciation is so different, right? So I think it's the first time that I like reading this, I was able to understand it because I thought, oh, wow, this is the way, not that I would say it, but I've heard it said, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I thought. Kind of gives it a musical quality for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I certainly had to like focus more because of those words just to because I'm like what word is this? And then trying to like step back and say, all right, what is making sense here?
Right.
You know? Um
Mm.
yeah. But I also like love the refrain. And I'm wondering like what does jump back refer to? What does it mean? How is he using it? Because I'm not sure what that actually the connotation or meaning of it. Because I'm sure it's not like jump literally jump back, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, kind of similarly. Um, First thing I noticed was like there's certain sounds are replaced either by the apostrophe or like a vowel sound. So like huh being her, and it took me a second to um think about which word would have went in that space, but then like reading it, like it makes sense phonetically, like kind of what Sonia said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And when I read this, I think a lot of the same things. I think I look at the word like for arm at the very the top on the right in that first line for arm, and then even for around. And I think about how many of us, like in the ways that we speak, whatever ways that we speak, how many of us actually articulate every single letter in some of the words that we say. And like you said, Sonia, when you're talking about the how phonetical part of this is I think about like even the question, if I were to ask a question like what you doing tomorrow? And typically I think English speakers understand what I'd be asking if I say, what you doing tomorrow? But if I ask someone who's learning a language, if I ask a multilingual learner who does not speak English, what you doing tomorrow, and ask them to actually write that out, what would that look like? And we know that I'm asking, like, what are you doing tomorrow? But that's not what that sounds like. What you doing tomorrow? And so it's interesting. And when we look at just the language itself, looking at when we think even about like assessment for literacy assessments, sometimes things that students might be marked wrong because they may not be like enunciating or pronouncing certain things, but still may comprehend what it is they're saying. And so, what is it that educators need to know? What is it that speech pathologists need to know when we're looking at language and the way students are producing language, making decisions about whether or not they need special services, or just understanding the way their language actually functions? So, that is one of his poems. And this is another poem by him. So, this one is a little bit longer. I'll just be quiet for about 30 seconds, but just notice what are you noticing about the difference in the language that Paul Laurence Dunbar uses in this poem? So what do we see as the difference between Mr. Dunbar's first poem and this poem? And what does it tell you about his linguistic repertoire?
This is standard English, right? I mean, this is the English that, when the teacher would have said to us in class back in my day, you're going to read a poem and all this is what I would expect to see, right? And I have to say, it's very beautiful. Again, this is too. I'm wondering why I never heard of this man before. That tells you something. Um, but it is very beautiful, but it's far more standard than the first example.
Mhm. And so, what I guess I would ask us to consider too. So, when you're reading both the poems, is there one that seems more poetic than the other?
Mm,
Is there one that seems more proper? Is there one that seems more appropriate? If we were to show both of these poems without saying they were the same author and without
mhm.
showing the picture of this person, what do you think the conversation would be? And we said, like, we're going to teach poetry. Here are two poems we're going to work with. What do you think the conversation would be about both of these poems side by side? And I guess what we're taught to think about poetry
Right,
and
right.
what's acceptable in school. So what are your thoughts about that?
Side by side, I do think initially looking at both, I would maybe pause at the first one about like in regard to spelling. Like I think I would initially think, "Oh, why is this spelled this way?" And I mean, poetry is artistic, but I think initially that's where my mind would go.
Mhm. And I'm so glad you said that, Christiana, because when we look at like some of the elements of Black English has its own rules. It has its own rules related to grammar, related to spelling, and everything that's spelled the way it was according to the rules of Black English are spelled absolutely the way they're supposed to be spelled and the and correctly. So we'll take a look at those in just a minute. So I'm going to show you a video. I want to just jump ahead because as we start to dissect language a little bit, I want to jump ahead to, and I know a few of you have already seen this video as we work together. But we're going to watch a video of like a teacher in the 90s who is he's teaching a strategy that's used for well, we're going to look at what the strategy is. And I would like for you to look forward to see is the strategy something that's familiar to you? What is he doing? And then who is in the classroom? Who are the students who you see in the classroom? What is the demographic of students who you see in the classroom? And think in your mind again about when we think about Black English, who speaks Black English? What are the things that come to mind? And when we look at who's in the classroom, is this representative of who we think of when we think of Black English? So as we watch this clip, who's in the classroom? And what's the name of the teaching strategy that he is using? And he's gamifying a teaching strategy. But what is the strategy? And I put in a hint that it's a bilingual teaching strategy. What is this teaching strategy that he's using in the video? So who's in the classroom? What's the sort of strategy that he's using in its gamified form?
Okay, and Kina, did you
Yes.
set the sound in your share before you turned it on?
I don't think so.
Okay, let's see if it
Okay.
works and then.
Okay. All right. Let me play it for a second and tell me if you can hear it.
The LA school system
Can you hear it?
Yes,
Wonderful.
perfect.
Okay.
knows its minority students will need to be, in effect, bilingual. ES 100 in Watts is one of 60 schools using an experimental program called Academic English Mastery.
I need all groups to pay attention. Cloyd, I need your focus now. And Gerardo.
Daniel Russell uses a game of Jeopardy to teach his grade 5 class how to translate their home language into mainstream American.
Okay, here we go. My grandpa cooked dinner every night.
Person singular. My grandpa cooks dinner every night.
Which linguistic feature is not in mainstream American English?
Third person singular.
Yes. And Marisol, how do you code switch this into mainstream American English?
My grandpa cooks dinner every night.
You just got 500 more points. He's fun.
He is funny.
Okay, Ariel Manon, what's the answer?
He is funny.
He is funny? Excellent translation. Here we go. We don't have nothing to do. Okay, quiet please.
We don't have nothing to do.
Oh, I'm sorry. That is not, I'll wait. That's not accurate translation in mainstream American English. Oh, you're at minus 400. So let me roll. Let's see which team will have an opportunity to get it. I might roll you guys again. 1.
We don't have anything to do.
Excellent translation.
Well, perhaps the biggest misunderstanding is the idea that we are somehow teaching African American language, teaching Ebonics, if you will. We don't need to teach African American language.
Because they come speaking.
They already know it.
Yeah.
Our task is to help move them towards mastery of the language of school in its oral and written form, but to do that in a way where they are not devalued or where they feel denigrated in any way by virtue of their cultural and linguistic differences. Because when you begin to devalue youngsters and make them feel that who they are doesn't count, then we turn them off from education.
Last night, we baked cookies. Are you ready? Okay. Number 1, what language is it in? It is an African American language. Number 2, what linguistic feature is in AAL?
Past tense marker, ED.
Past tense marker ED, that's 2. And how do you code switch it into mainstream American English?
Last night we baked cookies.
You got 500 more points. Is it too easy or I just taught you well this year?
Students in the program show significant gains in written English. Those behind it believe that unless more teachers treat home language as sympathetically, they'll condemn more generations to school failure. Language remains a formidable frontier in the legacy of slavery.
So who did you notice is in the classroom?
Brown people, like African Americans and maybe Latinos seem to be in the classroom. The students, right? You're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, that's what I could see the most anyway.
Yeah. And it's what we're going to look at is, and what's important to note about that is that it's not just Black students and Black folks who use Black English. There is a lot of research about a lot of communities where you have Latino folks, you have Asian folks, you have there's a study that we'll look at really quickly where there are students from Cambodia and the out in California, and the neighborhood they live in is predominantly Black. So the English that they're learning is Black English, and it's the language that they're comfortable with because in the neighborhood where they live, where their friends and the community are speaking Black English, it's the language that they want to communicate, that they want to use to communicate with the people who they know. So who are we? Who can we be as a school system to say that that's wrong or that's inappropriate or it's inaccurate? Because when they're going back into their home communities where they live, it's a language that that provides all the words that we talked about in the very beginning, that it's rich in culture, it's part of their community. But what is addressed in the beginning of the video, which is really important too, is that our job is not to denigrate the language or to look at the language through a deficit-based place, but to provide the same way we do for our multilingual learners the access to what we call standard English. So that way our students have choice about how they navigate their language and that they have a broadened linguistic repertoire, not in a hierarchical sense, not in a way of saying, well, this language is more appropriate or this language is better, but here are all of these languages that you should have access to, and then you decide which one you want to use, how, because there are some scholars who debate that it's inappropriate to teach students how to code switch because then by telling students they have to, or by requiring students to code switch, because what some researchers will say, and some educators will argue as well, is that if we're telling students to code switch, what we're telling them is the reason you have to code switch is because what you already have, the code you're using, is not appropriate. And therefore, you need to use this one that's better, that's more formal, that is more appropriate. That is not the message that we want to communicate to students about appropriateness and about value. We don't want to make a value judgment about the language, but we do want to say that we're very well aware that there are also research studies that show that folks who use Black English, if on a job application or if they're filling out calling for job interviews or calling to get apartments, or showing up to job interviews, that a lot of times they are going to be less likely to be hired. Not even to mention like just the anti-blackness that's involved with that, but that there are so many folks who just do see an inappropriateness who equate Black English with just being slang or with being less educated. And so there are repercussions there are very real world repercussions for that. Does that mean, though, that we tell students what they're speaking is wrong? No, because it's not wrong. But we want to say, in order for you to have access to getting to whatever it is that you want to have access to, let's broaden your linguistic repertoire and make sure that you also can teach standard English, which is what he's doing in this classroom. So the teacher is using a strategy, and it's a strategy that's used very much in bilingual education. What is the name of the strategy, or what's your understanding of the strategy that he's using?
Translanguaging.
There's part of that. There's part of translanguaging there's part of, and I think that based on his interaction with the students, it seems like he is very open and promotes translanguaging in his classroom and for students moving in and out of language. But there's another strategy that that we'll talk about that he's using specifically. And it's really related to this comparison between the two languages.
Yeah, it's contrastive analysis.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and why do you want to talk, Kathy, about what contrastive analysis is and why it's that?
So contrastive analysis is when you take two languages and you look at the features of each language and you actually compare them so that the language learners can understand how language functions, right?
Mhm.
Which again, going to what you said, it kind of takes it out of any kind of like critical perspective and treats both languages as equals because you're looking at grammar structures
Yes.
rather than saying what you're saying is incorrect and this is the correct way. It's
Mhm.
this is the way it's said in this language and this is the way it's said in this language.
Yes. Yep. And
In fact, I could just say it's the way, like if you've raised a bilingual child, like I raised a bilingual, my son was bilingual. I used to, without knowing at that time the strategy or anything, I just did it because it came naturally. I used to say to him, Miko, so what's another way of saying this? What other way do we know how to say this? And then he would say it to me in Spanish, or if he was saying it in Spanish, I would, then ask him to say it for me. That is kind of how I got him to think in English. And so he was able to do that mostly automatically,
Yeah.
right? And it worked. He is bilingual. So I mean,
Yeah.
it worked.
It is. And that's what, thank you for sharing that. And that's essentially what the teacher was doing was he was asking,
Yeah.
how do you translate this into
Mhm.
this other language? There was no judgment at all. There was no
No,
like, that's not wrong. It was like, how do you translate this other thing? And it was so impressive to see the kid,
oh,
the
they were
kids, I
so
can't even,
excited.
they were so excited. And when he said, I don't know, like the third person marker or
Yeah,
something,
yeah.
I was
Oh, I
like,
loved it. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
yeah,
ED, the third person, the past
yes.
tense marker, whatever he said. I
Mhm.
mean, that was really impressive to be able to talk about language that way.
It was, and and it's something that I think we do too with our students, just building that metalinguistic awareness, just being
Mhm.
very aware of how is it that we're using language, and in which situation do we use language, like what's our purpose and who's our audience and when we're using
Right.
it. So just some research that I wanted to share about what's going on, especially for the argument around including speakers of Black English under the multilingual umbrella is that so on the left it says the number of students identified as English language learners has been increasing and changing the demographics of school districts across the nation. So this comes from data in 2022. Black in the middle, Black students who speak varieties of English that are not considered standard, such as patois and Creoles, a lot of times are misidentified as English language learners, or in the case of African American vernacular English or Black language, are not systemically supported in language instruction because they are not included in language policy. And so this comes from research by John Ball, who has written extensively about Black English and argues extensively as well for that Black speakers of Black English be included in language policy. And then on the right, regarding language, Theo Harris and O'Toole conducted a research study stating that principals who effectively enacted social justice leadership for students who we would call multilingual learners or English language learners are informed and buoyed by two sources. So, one, an asset-based orientation towards language, and two, the knowledge of the research on second language acquisition. And so, what a lot of scholars about Black English argue is that the same way if you're getting your ESL cert or your bilingual certification, we learn about you become experts in the second language acquisition process. Because all teachers are teaching language all day long. They're using language, they're teaching through language, should also have an understanding about the second language process to support students who are multilingual learners. And again, I would put under that umbrella supporting students who speak Black English. So scholars of culturally responsive teaching have discussed the need for linguistically responsive pedagogy, including an asset-based orientation towards speakers of Black English and English language learners. So none of this is anything that's new or groundbreaking. It's just that the argument for in our teacher education programs, in our leadership education programs, is this something that across the board all of us are required to learn? And we know that it's not required right now, but so this is a study that I was telling you about earlier. It's an article called "It Was a Black City: African American Languages in California's Changing Urban Schools and Communities." And essentially, the point of this study was just showing that there are many other students besides Black students who are learning who are learning Black English actually as part of their second language. Um, so let me see. I'm going to skip that for a moment. And then I just wanted to read what's on this slide. So the fact that African American language or Black English is used by both African Americans and many of their peers from other ethnic groups should be seen as an opportunity to bolster African American students' pride in AAL, African American language, as well as to foster knowledge about the past, present, and future of Black English or African American language and African American culture. Such a focus has the potential to support students in learning much about language, race, and ethnicity in ways that could build alliances between students who share neighborhoods, schools, and experiences of marginalization. And so this comes from the same article about the students just from different ethnic and cultural groups who live in the same space and who speak the same language. And let me see. So the question I asked is then, so like, what's the problem? How come a lot of this, or what's one of the problems that we face as language educators? So educational leaders who might have a background in bilingual, and this is from a researcher name, oh, I forgot his first name, but G. Educational leaders who might have a background in bilingual education or ESL might have the technical knowledge to understand language acquisition. So that's us, but can still hold deficit views or racial linguistic ideologies of students who speak varieties of what is considered a standard English. So, for example, Spanglish or Black English. Not because there's anything wrong with the language, but rather because of the perceptions the educational leader holds about the speakers of the language. What many of these researchers have in common is the view that language and discourse do more than reflect reality, they also construct reality. And so I'm just curious, I just want to pause for a moment because this is something where I remember when I came into my role as a director of ELL and bilingual programs in the district I was working in, I assumed that all of the bilingual teachers, that all of the ESL teachers would all be just down for our kids and that everyone would have asset-based orientations towards the kids that we serve. That was definitely a misconception of mine, and I wound up learning about that different people have different values in the types of Spanish that are spoken, depending on the countries that students come from, depending on the accents that they came with. And so it just reinforced too I was like, oh, duh, like why would I not think that? Because I am very aware of a lot of the discriminatory practices against Black English by other speakers of English. So and not only by other speakers of English, but they are during the Ebonics controversy in 1997, there were a lot of prominent Black folks who spoke out against Black English because they said it's something that should not be taught. But like what was said in the video earlier, is that kids don't need to be taught Black English. They come to school and they know that already. How do we use that in order to help students also access standard English? And so I just want to pause for a minute just to ask, just speaking to this quote right here about have you had any experiences or awarenesses of folks who do have backgrounds in bilingual education and language education, the technical aspects of education, but might still hold deficit views of language?
Oh, dear Lord, yes. I mean, in my long career, I have met so many, unfortunately, I'm being honest here, and
Yeah.
so many colleagues who have viewed bilingual education or the whole thing is almost like a dumping ground for students who are not necessarily successful. And this idea of we got to get them out of this as soon as we can. We got to get them out of the bilingual program. We got to get them on to only English program. Um, thus viewing bilingualism as a deficit instead of an asset, right? So yes, to answer your question, absolutely have noticed it. Um, has it gotten better? I don't know. I'll be honest. I hope so. Um, but now we're faced with the challenge of, executive orders claiming that English is the official language of the country. And also, I don't know what to say about that. But have I noticed it? Yes.
And I'm glad you brought that up too about the executive order because I was just reading a policy brief about that executive order. And what the policy brief argues, which I thought was really interesting and what I appreciate, is they were saying instead of us as educators and policymakers and researchers or whoever arguing about whether or not English should from the executive order, whether or not English should be the official language, that the root, and this is just a quick diversion, is what really should be argued is the legitimacy to make such a declaration. Because really there are too many laws in place that make that executive order not legitimate. It's not, it's communicating something that is not a law, that will not be passed, that really doesn't have any teeth at all. But because it's an executive order and it's said, there are definitely people who share those ideologies who feel validated
Yeah.
in their thoughts, even though that thing does not have any teeth.
Right.
Um, so any other thoughts before I just move to the next slide? Okay. I'm going to skip this no, I'm not going to because of time. I'm going to skip that one for now. And what I just wanted to share, just really quickly before I get into just some of the nuts and bolts of Black English, is that there were position statements by numerous organizations that we're familiar with. Here's one of them, TESOL International, who put out position statements acknowledging that. So this is back in 1997, the year that the Ebonics controversy happened. And just to give a quick overview, the controversy it really wasn't even that much of a controversy. It was a district who said, we want to make sure that we have a program that teaches Black English because we're looking at our literacy scores. We want to make sure that we are supporting them in learning standard English and helping develop their literacy. They did not say we are teaching Black English in school, but it got in the media and the news just kind of went crazy with it and started saying, here's this district who's trying to one, teach kids Black English because they want them speaking like slang and just bad English is what they were calling it. They want them speaking that in school. And then two, they're trying to use bilingual funding in order to do this atrocity. That's the way it was communicated in the news. So all of these linguistic organizations and people who deal with language and the professionals and the people who research put out these position statements to say Black English is a legitimate language. And so TESOL used the term African American Vernacular English. The Conference on College Composition and Communication, they originally put out a statement in 1998, revised it in 2016, put it out again in 2021, just saying that we also recognize Ebonics or Black English as an official language. And then they cite all of their research. There's another statement by the Linguistic Society of America. And I have, when these slides are shared or when the PDF version of these are shared, you could scan all these links if any of these are things that you're interested in reading. But it's just important to know that there's not a few researchers out there who are like, we just said so. There's so much support. There's so much research by various organizations that acknowledge African American Vernacular English or Black English as a language. And unfortunately, and I'm really glad that we get to just have this conversation tonight, is that when the majority of educators who are teaching our kids do not know this, then we wind up having students who are overclassified for speech pathology, overclassified for special education, who are seen as if they can't read and they don't recognize certain, or they're mispronouncing letters, when really they are following the rules of the language, of the home language that they speak. So what do we do with it? And now we'll get into some nuts and bolts. So regarding Black English has rules around every single one of these in all of these areas of language. So there are phonetic rules for Black English. There are rules around phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. Because it is rule governed. So what I just wanted to show, since we were talking about contrastive analysis with that video, is that this is what we're used to it looking like when we talk about like Spanish and English. And this is a really simplified version, is when we're looking at cognates, for example, like in Spanish. And if I'm comparing both of the languages, I would look at a word like elefante, and in English, no, sharing that it's a cognate for elephant. In Spanish, the word chocolate, a cognate for that would be chocolate in English. So when I'm teaching students, for example, just this whole concept of cognates, I can use contrastive analysis on this very simple level, or I can use it to talk about things on a pragmatic level with morphology, with any of those. So what I wanted to show first this is a document that was put out by by CAL, so the Center for Applied Linguistics. And what they share is just a breakdown of all of these different features of Haitian Creole. So I'll just give you like a glimpse of what this looks like for Haitian Creole. They have one for Spanish, they have one for Russian. There is not one that exists like this yet for Black English. And this would be something that would be super helpful for teachers to have. So for example, when we look at this one that breaks down Haitian Creole, and also just a quick disclaimer, when we read through this, unfortunately, the language that's used here is very deficit-based language. And you'll be able to see a lot of it, but I'll point it out to you as we read it too. And so I would encourage us, obviously, to try to switch the language to use more asset-based language, and we'll look at examples why. So in the very first row, it talks about, so the plural forms. In Haitian Creole, it says the type of transfer error in English. And so it talks about the omission of a plural marker S. So the example would be, I have 5 book, instead of saying, for example, I have 5 books. The explanation in the last column says, in Haitian Creole, nouns do not change to show the pluralization. So what I would argue in just that middle column, the reason why they're using deficit language there is because they're calling it an omission of the plural marker. Just by calling it an omission means that there's this standard form that really is the norm, that's like the legitimate form. And when you're not doing what we consider the legitimate form, then you're omitting something. Rather than saying that in Haitian Creole, and not only Haitian Creole, but there's a lot of other languages that instead of using like this plural marker S, that we are not I guess multiplying, or we don't have to be repetitive in saying that there's multiple things. If I'm already saying there's five, then you understand that there's more than one. So why do I now have to add this S? So what's a way to communicate that, I guess, without saying we're omitting something? Because is it really something that's being omitted? Or for those of us who speak, I guess what we call standard English, are we just being extra by having to add this S when you already know there's five of something? So the second one, possessive forms. Again, we use this deficit, well, they're using this deficit frame, that there's an avoidance of the apostrophe S to describe possession. So the example is the children of my sister. This happens in Spanish as well. And so the explanation is that prepositional phrases are used to express possession in Haitian Creole. So again, even though this seems like by calling it the avoidance of S, it still is coming from like a deficit frame to say we're avoiding this particular thing rather than saying it's just said a different way. The wording of it is just said a different way. It's not because it's an omission, it's not because it's an avoidance of what we consider normal. It's something different that is just inherent to this particular language and specific to this particular language.
I just, Kiina,
Yes.
I think that this is actually a demonstration of the problem with academic English because they can't just say no apostrophe S. They have to use a $5 word avoidance,
Yeah. Yeah. It is, and I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And why does it and what can seem like something that maybe I can see someone saying like, well, why are you making it so complicated? Why can't we just say that it's missing something? But the thing is, when we're saying that it's missing, that a language is missing something, you're implying that there's something else that they're supposed to be there. And if we're saying that's supposed to be there in the standard English we expect, yes, it's supposed to be there. In Haitian Creole, it's not supposed to be there because it's not the feature of the language. In Black English, it's not supposed to be there because it's not a feature of the language. So if we're using one language and saying that this is kind of the right way and everything else is a deviation from, then that's the way we wind up actually looking at people as well. Because when we're talking about how some folks are using kind of language as a proxy to talk about people, if we're saying that there's something wrong with your language, what we're really sometimes saying is there's something also wrong with the speakers of that language. So rather than saying there's a deviation from the norm, we can instead just communicate it as this is the rule of this particular language and this is the way this language functions, which is different from the way this other language functions. So those are some examples in Haitian Creole. We see the same things in Spanish. Hold on, sorry. We see the same thing in Spanish in terms of in this second row right here where it says omission of articles in the second row, omission of articles in certain contexts, such as to identify a profession. Well, is it really an omission? Like if it's happening in Spanish, is it an omission or is this just the way that Spanish works? It's the way that Spanish works. And then the same thing with Russian. So I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but then just for educators to understand that when we say that there's these omission of articles, well, in Russian, they're just not required. These are things that are not required in this language. So the example is he has job. His dream is to become a teacher because Russian language does not have articles. And so there are a lot of these rules here. And the reason I wanted to show these two is because there are a lot of language features in some of these other languages that are pretty much identical in Black English. So if we can name Russian as a language, if we can name Haitian Creole as a language, if we name Spanish as a language, and Black English has a lot of these similar features, why do we not name that as a language as well? So here are some of the features of Black English or of African American English. They are communicated in this particular chart in a deficit way, but I want to just point this out and then we could talk about how to make them asset-based. And then we're going to we're going to look at doing contrastive analysis with these. So here are just some grammatical features of Black English and we saw this in the game that played. So the phrase is they hungry, which we would assume is the absence of a linking verb. However, from an asset-based perspective, Black English doesn't require that. Black English, the point is communicated. When you say they hungry, we know what's being said. Whether you say is or are in there, the communicating the message is clear. The habitual be in Black English. So the example being, He be playing basketball after school. So the habitual be meaning that this is something that this person does, whoever it is, continuously on a regular basis is the what the habitual be represents. He jumped high, and we saw an example like this in the game that was played in the video, is that sometimes it's called like a zero copula or this S absence. But it's just not, we know who's being spoken about is just in Black English. It's one of the rules that it's just not necessary. Using double negatives. Ain't nobody can beat me. So that's something that's common in Black English as well. Distressed been conveys long-standing events with remote past. So for example, I've been see that movie. So it's like I've seen that movie a long time ago. Instead of saying I saw that movie long ago, I could say I've been seeing that movie a long time ago. So these are just a few of the features of Black English. These are some of the features, and there's so many more that when teachers are aware of these, then they can say, okay, the student, it's not that they're making an error. They're not making improper English. I mean, they're not speaking ungrammatical English or inappropriate English. What we can say is they are actually following the rules of this language, the language of Black English. Um, so we'll try a few of these ourselves. So she ain't doing nothing. She ain't doing nothing. If you were going to translate that, and if you remember them from this chart, the way the kids in the video kind of named what the feature was of Black English, what would you say the feature is here? And then how would you translate this into, I guess, what's called either dominant, mainstream, or standard English? She ain't doing nothing.
Well, translation, she isn't doing anything.
Yeah, she isn't doing anything is a translation. They leaving.
They
What would be
are
the translation?
they are leaving.
Yeah, they are leaving. She run fast.
She runs fast.
Hmm. I've been listening to Benito since before the Super Bowl announcement.
I've listened to Benito's music since before the Super Bowl announcement.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I've been listening to his music for a really long time. And so Ben is that word that communicates that. So yep, like I've always been listening to Benito since before. And then the last one, he began good grades. Sorry, my thing is in the way. He began good grades on his homework.
Same thing. He's always getting good grades on his homework.
Yeah. Let's see. Yep, he's always exactly that. He's always getting good grades on his homework. And so it's like once you know the rule, then we can translate into any language. And so it's and again, so when we're reading with kids, when we're working with kids, instead of letting them know that their language is wrong, which it's not, how do we identify what the rule is and then help them understand what's the translation between what they're using? Oh, here's one more. He done cooked the heck out of that lasagna.
He overcooked the lasagna.
Yeah.
Ah, let's see. So
Yeah.
it's surprisingly, he cooked a really good lasagna.
Uh,
And so, and this one is so fun because this one, the what done in Black English means, and this is something that we learned in John McWhorter's book, is that when we use this word done, he done cooked something or she done went and, told that story or whatever. It's because we weren't expecting something to happen.
mhm.
And then whatever happened, it happened unexpectedly. So it was a surprise. So like he done cooked the heck out of lasagna. It was like typically he's not a good cook. I was actually expecting him to burn the lasagna, but surprisingly, it was a really good lasagna. And so that done right there is something that communicates this whole thought process of I wasn't expecting it, but it happened. And so that's something like just a beautiful part of Black English. That's something that does not exist in the standard version of English.
Kina,
Um,
if I can, I would just say that both
Please.
done and been for me, I love that. They are so efficient. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? I mean, they express something with just one word that would
Hmm.
takes us 3 or 4 words to express, right?
Yes.
In standard English. They express it and they express it with it's like gusto for me. It's like really
Hmm.
express it. It's made very
Yeah.
clear. So I like both the been and the done, I think are really good.
Hmm. Yeah, they're fun. They're a lot of fun too. So what does this mean for policy in New Jersey? Because especially when we're talking about literacy strategies that So we are a bunch of language educators. Not everybody is a language, even though everyone is teaching language because everyone is using language. Not everyone knows a lot of the things that we know as language educators about asset-based language, about understanding how language functions, about these different linguistic features of Black English or of Haitian Creole or of Spanish or whatever those are. Because as you all know, our kids wind up getting overclassified for special services not because of language, but because of the lack of understanding of language by the adult professionals who are in charge of making decisions about our kids. So, what does this mean for policy in New Jersey, and where might Black English be considered in language policy? And this is something that I just wanted to pop on here because, again, when we're thinking about like strategies to support students, there are so many people who are making decisions about what supports students and about placement for students, about services who just don't have enough knowledge about language acquisition. And it shouldn't be just a job either of everyone under the multilingual umbrella to know it, because everyone is working with students who speak a variety of whether they're languages, dialects, whatever it is that people are calling them. So what I just highlighted here was our bilingual education code. And I'm not gonna like live in this, but just looking at where are there places in here that do consider Black English. So something that stood out to me is when I'm looking at number three, ensuring the provision of culturally and linguistically responsive, research-based, and effective language instructional programs. That is not unique to students who speak languages other than English. It shouldn't be unique to students who speak, like whether it's Spanish or Korean or whatever the other languages are. If we're talking about culturally linguistic, responsive, research-based, and effective language instruction, why can't the language in that policy, the way it's communicated right here, not include Black English? Um, there is research that argues that because Black English is its own language, that students should be considered bilingual as well. But that is number three is one that I wanted to point out there. Um, on this one, where ensuring ML, so number eight is one that stood out to me, ensuring that multilingual learners, because I would put speakers of Black English under a multilingual learner umbrella, receive equal educational opportunities, programs, and services necessary to achieve a thorough and efficient education. And regarding services, part of those services to me are how do we provide the service of like professional development to make sure people understand all of the elements of Black English, especially if you're working in a district that has a large number of students who are speaking Black English as well. Um, and then the question for me too is what does it really mean to be multilingual or multilectal, or this difference between being like an MLEL? And what our policy says is that a multilingual learner, ML, means a student whose primary language is not English. And I might insert in there who is not, it is not the standardized version of English that we expect in schools, because not everybody speaks this standard version at home, who is identified through the process set forth in this chapter, who's developing proficiency in multiple languages, for example, English. And again, I would put standard English, and maybe your private English or standard English and then another language. And then the term is synonymous with English learner and English language learner. And I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, but that concludes the presentation. And I would like to know just if there are any questions or thoughts about what we just discussed.
Kiina, I loved it. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no, that was an amazing presentation. My question is, what do you recommend someone like multilingual learner teachers, ELL teachers, do to be more inclusive of Black English?
That is a wonderful question, and I appreciate you for asking that. I think that I think it's helpful to when we do our own research around, for example, like if I'm working in a predominantly Spanish speaking space, I probably have a knowledge, like one of the things that I know comes up all the time in PDs when we're doing like sheltered instruction, for example, with teachers who don't speak Spanish, is helping them understand that like the TH sound doesn't exist in Spanish. And so if kids are spelling the, duh, that we're not going to mark them wrong for that. And that if they're spell, we want to make sure that, I'm sorry, let me back up for a minute. that if students are pronouncing, not spelling, if students are pronouncing the like duh, that we're not going to mark them off for that if we're doing like a running record. And if they're writing it and they write THE, we want to make sure that they are spelling it the way it's said. But if writing THE is pronounced duh, that's okay because I think of the word schedule, for example, that I pronounce it schedule. I think about people in England that pronounce schedule like schedule. Do we tell them that schedule is wrong when they're pronouncing schedule? We don't. Do we say we're going to mark you off and you can't speak and you can't spell? It's a different pronunciation. And like I think you mentioned earlier, Sonia or Kathy, just about the way our English language is, there's so much that's not phonetical, like Enough. Why? Why? Enough. Like for what's the rationale? So if I have so that same understanding as ESL teachers, as language teachers that we have for like the languages that we're familiar with, is understanding enough about Black English to apply that there as well. Because in Black English, for example, you can have a student who says, "I'm going to take a bath." The word is spelled, we would spell it BATH. It's pronounced BAF. It's appropriate for how the same way schedule is appropriate. I don't say schedule, I say schedule. I say bath, someone else says bath. I'm not going to say you're saying it wrong as long as I know that your pronunciation of bath is still spelled BATH. And I'm not going to correct and say you're wrong for saying that as long as you understand that your version of bath and the way you say that just ends with a TH when you're writing that out. So that's I guess a long answer of saying that I think as language educators, it's really important for us when we're in these spaces where people know that you have so much expertise around language development, is talking about Black English in the same way, that there's a language acquisition process. There are different ways of pronouncing things. The TH, while it doesn't exist in Spanish, the F is, might be the thing for the TH in Black English. And so it's helping our colleagues understand that the same way we have asset-based approaches for multilingual learners, we're going to have those asset-based approaches for speakers of Black English. The same way we want to give our multilingual learners access to their languages and validate those while giving them access to standard English, we want to give our speakers Black English, validating their language, but then also giving them access to standard English, just the way our friend did in the video, is like, how do I teach you to be multilingual and navigate both? And you make the choice of what you're using, not because one is better than the other, but because you get to decide based on your audience and where you are and what assignment you're doing, which one you feel like you should use.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And I was even thinking, looking at that chart, um, when it said omitting things, just like another way they could have said it is, oh, in mainstream American English, you conjugate the verb. In Black English, base form of the verb or base form of whatever. Like they could easily just word it differently as well. But yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For sure. That was a great question. Thank you for asking that. Yeah, and that is it. So I appreciate you all. Oh, thank you so much for the survey. I appreciate you all being here and engaging in this. And I appreciate your interest in this because it's so important. And so many of our kids have access to this, and it's just not something that typically people consider. So I really appreciate you valuing the language as it should be valued enough to show up and then to move forward with whatever it is that you have.
Yes, and if you're interested, those of you who are not attending our Countering Anti-Black Racism Committee sessions, I mean, I invite you to join because our conversations are really fascinating, and Kiina does a great job moderating all of that. So thank you, Kiina. This was great.
Yep.
If you're interested in getting a PD certificate, you put the link in the chat. Also in the chat are as a PDF of the slides from today, so you can download that. And also in the chat is our next PLC, which Christiana is going to be one of the presenters. The other presenter is
Yay!
Maria Halkias, and she's going to be talking about verbal reasoning and literacy knowledge. That will be Thursday, April 23rd at 4 o'clock. So thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Kiina, again, for doing a wonderful presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you, Kathy, for the space.
Thank you, Kiina. This was excellent.
Yeah.